Christ Church, Cooperstown, New York. The buttresses here are very important. Linked to James Fenimore Cooper, who was very instrumental in many of the modifications and the Gothic Revival additions to the church. We're going to go in there. We're going to see what other kind of things we can see in here. Let's look at this old door handle. Very interesting here. We're going to head on inside the church. First thing you notice, of course, is the beautiful, bright stained glass windows, which Cooper was instrumental in having put in, which is very typical of the Gothic era. The pointy windows at the top. Beautiful artwork here. Many stained glass windows in this church. Many historical things going on in this area. This church was very important to the Cooper family. So it's a beautiful site, beautiful history to this building, which is one of, if not the only physical structure that is directly linked to James Fenimore Cooper, which he had many dealings with here, and many of the, like I say, instrumental in many of the additions that were done to the church. The other buildings, his homestead over where Cooper Park is, was burned to the ground, and his home up where the Fenimore Art Museum burned to the ground. So the church is the only physical structure that is still in existence today that has a link to James Fenimore Cooper. We're going to take a walk over here. Coming out of the other side of the church, like I say, these buttresses were very instrumental to his life and his work in doing the Gothic Revival here. They had no structural use at all. They were just for aesthetic purposes. Again, the pointy tops of the windows, the stained glass windows. Here's the cemetery. The Cooper family plot is over there. I'll show you James Fenimore Cooper's grave and his wife and some of their family in a moment here. But this church was originally built in 1807, and it was a rectangular meeting house, and it was typical of the churches in that day. So in 1840, James Fenimore Cooper, the author, renovated the building in the Gothic Revival style. Moved by the medieval churches he saw during his travels to Europe, Cooper recreated these venerable and symbolic architecture. Pointed arches, they had the buttresses, quatrefoils, and rose windows captured what he called a truly churchy feeling. Cooper believed the church's strength lay in its continuity with the doctrine, worship, and the piety of its past. He hoped to inspire renewed faith in his own time. For over 200 years, this congregation of Christ Church has sought to serve God and to reveal God's beauty, truth, and love in this community of Cooperstown. When a time period here in this early 1800s when few people could read or write, symbols communicated the basic beliefs of the Christian faith. These images can be found repeatedly throughout the buildings and the churchyard of Christ Church. The bell tower, the rose windows, the pointed arches, the fleur-de-lis, the quatrefoils, the gate, the trefoil, and the buttresses all pointed to different things that were biblical and extra-biblical that pointed to God. Pointing to God. Pointing to God up there. The fleur-de-lis on the fencing that surround the church. Very instrumental. The buttresses, pointed arches, and flying buttresses that allowed for taller and grander buildings that rose heavenward. Here's the newer part of the church. So these things you see, the rose window, the bell tower, the arches, these are all things that hopefully pointed people to God and in thinking more heavenly than in thinking worldly. So we're going to walk over here. Here's a map, Heavenly Hope at Her Heart. Susan Fenimore Cooper, James's daughter, wrote in 1850 in her book Rural Hours, with all the calmness of faith, with all the lowliness of humility, with all the tenderness of charity, and with the undying light of heavenly hope at her heart, the Christian church sits watching beside the graves of her children. Over here, we have many graves that are upright, but then we come to some that are laying down. This is William Cooper. He's the founder of Cooperstown, James Fenimore Cooper's son, James Fenimore Cooper's father, William Cooper. He departed this life in 1809 at age 55 years and 20 days. And there's his wife. Here's James Fenimore Cooper's grave and his wife Susan Augusta. And you have many other Cooper graves down this way. And in this area, the Pomeroy who married into the family. And there's a beautiful shot of the church. There again, with the stained glass windows pointing heavenward, the steeple pointing upward. A beautiful church, historic church. Much history in this area relating to James Fenimore Cooper and the community of Cooperstown, New York. So stay tuned. We're going to have more posts on James Fenimore Cooper and these Cooper sites in the town of Cooperstown, New York. As we exit the cemetery, we're looking over to your left over here. And that little park over there is the monument to James Fenimore Cooper. Before we go, I'm going to show you one of these trefoils here. Fleur-de-lis. They point upward, heavenward. Pointing to Christ, pointing to God, pointing to heaven, and pointing to things that are important, that are heavenly and not earthly. So we'll see you next time from Cooperstown, New York, Christ Church.